Hi, everyone. I'm Shuja Haider. I'm a senior editor at The Nation. Welcome. I've been an editor for about a year, and I commission and edit freelancers, and I also work with the DC correspondents, which we're lucky enough to have two of here today with us. We've got Ken Klippenstein, who I worked with last year, and then we traded with The Intercept, and they got him, and we got Aida Chavez, who I work with now. If you've followed Ken's work, you know that he does a lot of sourcing from documents, FOIA requests, and so on. And that's kind of mirrored the change in our political climate that we now have Aida, who has kind of a network of contacts within the progressive political world. So we're going to be hearing from two different approaches to the same kind of pursuit. And let's get started. I think we should start at the beginning with everyone's origin story. So you can go into the spider bite that got you started as a political reporter. I've got Ken first on my screen, so why don't you start us off?
Okay, cool. I never intended to be a reporter. I feel like politics kind of came to me and the news kind of came to me. It became harder and harder to ignore what was going on. I grew up during the Bush administration, and that was kind of a horror show. And then you have the Obama administration, which felt sort of like, obviously not as bad, but it felt kind of like the eye of the storm. And then, of course, Trump comes in. But back during the Obama administration, I was living in Madison, Wisconsin. And part of not living in DC or New York, which is where a lot of media nationally tend to be based, and for the national security stuff that I tend to do, all the spooks and officials live in North Virginia or the DC area. It was I had to find a different way to report because I didn't have access to those types of sources, and that's when I found FOIA. Stands for FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And I found that you don't really need sources when you're doing that kind of work. And you could just request documents, the government would give them to you. Of course, they redact the hell out of them. But that was really born of necessity. And I kind of fell in love with it. And I ended up learning this tool that I imagine I might not have learned if I had easy access to sources in sort of the traditional manner. Now, of course, I do both. I'm not saying source work was bad, but it was really nice to be able to learn a different sort of approach. So that's kind of how I got into the, not just media world, but the particular, approach that I have in reporting.
So Aida, what's your version?
So I've always been really obsessed with politics, unfortunately. Just ever since I was a kid, I was always drawn to it. I was also always drawn to writing. So I didn't intend to be a journalist. I think that was just the natural combination of both my interests. I wasn't sure what I wanted to study in college, and I knew I was going to Arizona State University, but it was between an English degree or maybe a political science degree. It was actually an accident. I stumbled upon the website for the journalism school at ASU, and I thought, sure, I like politics, I like writing, I'll be a journalist. And I went into it wanting to cover more international things. I thought, well, maybe someday I could be a war correspondent or something. But I ended up doing the DC bureau through the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. So it's a student-run program that does news for Arizona PBS. And so that's how I started reporting on the Hill. That's how I moved to DC, and I was addicted, just hooked to American politics. So
one thing that strikes me, and I think it's true of actually all of us, is that you guys both kind of started your political, and Ken, you kind of alluded to this, started your political reporting under a kind of very hostile government. And we're kind of into a different situation now, not necessarily, hopefully not one of allegiance or anything like that, but more complicated and nuanced, I guess. Have you experienced obviously you guys both switched places right when the administration switched. So you kind of changed your location as well. But how is reporting changed? Something I've been curious about myself.
I would say there's a sense of sort of PTSD among a lot of folks, which I'm sympathetic to, coming out of the Trump administration. Just like warp speed scandals. As a reporter, I couldn't keep up with the amount of things that I was being given and the amount of just, I mean, you can't make it up. The guy wanted to, I mean, I covered, Customs and Border Protection that has Border Patrol in it a lot of the last, during the Trump administration. I mean, the guy wanted to put a moat with like alligators in it. I'm not making this up, and put spikes on the walls, like, and just dozens of stories like that, many that never became public and that I was never able to, fully report out. But coming out of an administration like that, you have someone like Biden who's very imperfect in my view and has, his share of things to look at. But coming out of what I was describing before, people are kind of like, well, this is so much better. We don't want you to, if you criticize this guy too much, who knows, maybe we'll get someone else like Trump. Maybe we'll get Trump back in there. And I kind of get where they're coming from, because I understand that. I don't deny that Trump was a very unique type of evil. I don't know how else to put it. But the problem is, he came in after 8 years of Obama, and I wonder, if we're not going to hold Biden's feet to the fire, if that's not going to lay the groundwork for someone else like Trump to come back in. I think the two are sort of connected. I'm not saying that they're the same, but you have 48 years of sort of acquiescence to a sort of inadequate status quo, and that leads to sort of discontent, and so I don't see it as something that, if we report hard on Biden, that's going to really hurt and play into the hands of some super reactionary. But unfortunately, I do think that that's a pressure that we're operating under now.
I'd say one of the biggest challenges now is figuring out ways to like keep people engaged and keep audiences engaged, where under Trump, like everything felt like just the biggest threat to the Republic. And because the corruption was so like comical, I guess it was just easy to like call attention to your stories when you're like exposing things that are wrong with the administration. A lot of people read it. Now under Biden, there's still, corruption. It's just like the regular corruption of before. And so I find that a lot of like liberals in particular who were activated by the Trump administration now are not, I guess, like as tuned in to the news.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There was a whole kind of idea of journalism as being part of the resistance or whatever. And as you were describing, both of you, there's kind of not supposed to be a resistance under this government. But that kind of gets at something that I think is different about you guys, and it's been different about the nation since the nation has existed, which is that there is a kind of orthodoxy in journalism of objectivity and of not taking a side, which usually means kind of having a centrist standpoint. And you guys don't do that. Do you feel like that's been difficult to achieve? Like, is there pressure to kind of consolidate into that narrow lane as you go through your career?
I think that's what's so special about you guys, the nation, the place that I work at now, The Intercept, these types of outlets. They allow you to criticize something like the Biden government, but then you don't have to be some sort of Fox News hack or doing it in some sort of partisan way that often exists. And so I think a lot of times people don't really know what to do with us, because they're kind of like, this guy's offering, factual critiques of the Biden administration, but we're so used to countering this. I'm talking about the Biden administration, but maybe media culture generally. We're so used to countering this as, here's how we respond because they're Republicans. But they're like, wait a second, they're doing this from the left, and they don't quite know how to react. But that's a wonderful kind of independence to have, and it's so special because a lot of them, I know people at the big outlets. I'm sure I did this too, and they don't have that kind of freedom. I'm not saying they're told from the top, say this, don't say that, but there is a cultural sort of mandate, that holds that, Democratic administrations are criticized from the right and Republican administrations are criticized from from the left and center point of view. And thank God to you guys that you offer a platform to do this sort of factual analysis in a way that doesn't fall into that ridiculous spectrum that I think the vast majority of people are really tired of and kind of consensus disingenuous.
I think there's always going to be that pressure to kind of fit in with the establishment more. And I mean, it's true that I'm never going to have like the access to elected officials that maybe some of the more mainstream outlets will have. But I think that's part of like what makes not just my work, but the work of other left-leaning journalists different, is that it forces you to approach journalism in a different way. So, maybe you don't have like Democratic leaders like on speed dial, but you can get to know outside activists. You can get to know maybe even people who don't fit in, like in Congress, like the Squad or something like that. And so there's that. And then, like reporting on money and politics, that is something that you don't need access for. And that just leaves all those stories there for you. And so I think like it's a pro and a con, where kind of like the pressures of like the mainstream corporate media may be limiting in some ways, but not at all, because then it opens up all these other possibilities to like tell stories.
Yeah, I just want to say one other thing. When we're portrayed as kind of, oh, these guys are outsiders or they're kind of way out there, a lot of the stuff we're writing about and reporting on, for example, Medicare for all, foreign policy, these are solidly in the center of like the American electorate's opinion on things. It's only marginal if you were some DC freak who's like all your friends are lobbyists and things, that would be seen as some kind of outside view. So there is a kind of funhouse mirror effect where people are induced to think that your views are some kind of fringe thing, when in reality, a lot of the stuff I think, I don't. If opinion polling is to be believed, it's not marginal at all. It's solidly, that's closer to the center if you want to talk about how to perceive neutrality or what is the middle road.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's always been like a guiding principle for me, is like in every single thing I do and every single story that I cover, like I ask myself, how does this affect working people? Like 99% of this country, how does this political thing, this campaign affect them? Does it not? And I think like that, in addition to just like being accurate, those are like the two things that really just guide the way I do my work.
Yeah, something I think is really funny is that you guys reach a wide audience, and like you've been talking about, the subjects you cover and the perspective you take is not atypical of how working people think. But you turn on MSNBC and you'll constantly see like some ogre from like right wing giving the other side's perspective, but they don't have you guys on. It's a weird imbalance, but we actually want to devote the majority of our time to questions, and I think we have questions coming in already, so please use the chat to ask either of the group or of someone specific, even if you have questions for me about the editorial side of things. And actually, I think we'll get started with one. So this is from Austin Linfante to both of you. The question is, would you say the concept of blue MAGA rings true with valid criticisms of Biden's government, or does it more fall into fearing that criticizing Biden will lead to a new Trump? I think, Ken, you were talking about this a bit.
Yeah, I think those two are connected. And again, I don't want to, it can be comical and everything, but I mean, this is born of fear about something that's like kind of scary. I mean, it was kind of scary, the extent to which the Trump administration was consolidating power in the executive branch, a tendency that's been happening for our entire lives, for decades. But when you have, Shuja and I reported on this, when you have the president sending in federal border patrol, tactical units in the states that don't want them against their local government and state government's wishes, it's pretty scary. So I can understand, I don't know, like, it's not good to be inaccurate and sloppy and to assert things that aren't true. but I can understand why they're fearful. I guess in reporting, my hope is that if you give them a more accurate picture of things, I tend to think that fear is born of sort of misunderstanding about how things work, and not that it's a misunderstanding to think the Trump administration was, scary and unprecedented in certain respects. But to understand, why it's happening, I think that would help people to, not just shut down in the face of this kind of stuff, which unfortunately is the worst kind of thing you can do. I mean, we had 8 years of Obama where people kind of pretended like the Bush administration didn't happen. Nobody was prosecuted. There was very little in the way of comeuppance. Indeed, a lot of the Bush administration figured into the Trump administration. And then you get Trump. Those things are connected. So that's really the point that I'm trying to drive home. But I don't know. I guess I was sort of ambivalent. There is funny stuff, but it's like, I guess it's a failure of the media to explain to them how to, get involved and participate in a way so that they don't have to respond with a sort of cork board, like True Detective kind of, and then this guy and, like the Rachel Maddow kind of the drawing connections between all these different disparate figures to try to find some meaning there. When the reality of it is just staring you in the face. It's not particularly hard to divine what's going on. I mean, there's not, Trump administration was not a particularly secretive group. They kind of just had it all in the open. And I think that's generally how it is. So I don't know. It's kind of a roundabout answer, but that's sort of how I feel about it.
Well, I would tell liberals who don't want to hear criticism of Biden out of fear that it will pave the way for like another Trump, that a really easy way to avoid that would be for Democrats to actually be a party of working people and to use their very tiny majority in this very tiny window of time to pass things that improve the lives of people. I think without that, that is a bigger threat to pave the way for another Trump than anything else. That's more consequential than criticizing a Democratic administration.
Yeah, we have so many good questions pouring in that we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll get to as many of them as we can. And I think there's some common themes, so I'll try to bring them in as much as I can. There's one question that's kind of related here. This is from Aiden Curry, which is, do your personal politics pose conflict in the field with those of opposing views? And I think this is specifically in terms of access. When you come up, as you will, in being a political reporter with people who it may range from you have mild disagreements with, or you just don't like each other, or it can go all the way to someone who is actively evil. How do you work with that, and how do you work with if they have an idea of you as being some kind of crazy radical?
I know that in my experience, it often doesn't really come up. I mean, a lot of my sources are not leftist, particularly. I mean, there was somebody that was saying, "Oh, Ken's got the DSA, some DSA guy at DHS." It's like, Democratic Socialists of America and the Department of Homeland Security. I'm thinking, you don't know what these guys are like, do you? There's not any DSA people, at least that I know of, in DHS. They probably have some conservative features. I guess, I don't know. What they all have in common is they're motivated by some desire, usually sincere and wanting to help, to get something out that they feel bad about. And often the politics doesn't really come up. I guess I'm sort of struck by how much of a bubble we live in, because that whole Twitter world where we're all, having this discourse, very often sources, at least in law enforcement intelligence, they're not really aware of that. I mean, it's to the extent that they don't even Google my past stories, or they would kind of see my point of view on things and probably be, angry about it. But I don't know. I feel like people are less partisan than we're sort of led to think by the way the media portrays it. I'm not saying that people don't vote a certain way, but it's not central. It's not core to their identity, at least in my experience. And I'm sort of talking about rank and file type people. Obviously, politicians and staffers and things, that's going to be an entirely different world, the world of the Hill, and political appointees and high ups and things like that. So I feel like people are more open to things. Like I was saying before, these policies are broadly popular. It just, people might recoil if you say this is liberal. This is the liberal policy, So as long as I don't really lead with this kind of stuff, like my policies, I'm not going to lie to people, but I'm not going to use these sort of words that tend to trigger a sort of strong response of people. It often surprisingly doesn't come up, and it's been amazing for me to see.
I think that Aida, you might have an interesting perspective on this because a lot of your work puts you in contact with people who are presenting themselves at least progressive, but you don't go easy on them. Does that ever create tension?
Sometimes, but actually, me being an open socialist and like being open about like the way that I view the world, I find that it only kind of benefits my work because then people kind of understand how my brain works and how I'm approaching a story, and then maybe like they can try to talk me out of like what I'm thinking, whereas like a reporter who portrays himself as like completely like neutral and objective, they very clearly are not neutral. Nobody's neutral. And so I find that like being open about my politics will always help. And I find that it's almost like it transcends like partisanship, where I'm critical of Democrats, I'm critical of Republicans, and I'm critical of progressives. And so like I've never come across like a moderate Democrat or a Republican or someone who is super hostile to me. Like typically if I just like am professional and do my job correctly, like they will respect that and they will respect me. And so that's at least what I've found reporting on the Hill.
Yeah. Let's go to another question. This is from Prem Thakur. And the question is about what are some examples of the kind of corruption we were talking to at the beginning and the kind of revolving door of politics and media in DC that you've noticed over the course of your work, especially the ones that are sort of business as usual?
Yeah, the most shocking kinds are the ones that are legal, not necessarily the ones that are illegal. So for example, you have these law firms that will get tons of money from foreign investors, say Saudi Arabia or the Emiratis or the Chinese, maybe, or whatever it is. And then they go and they disperse money to politicians. Campaign finance is sort of complicated, but in almost every regard, they found some way to follow the letter of the law, but not the spirit. And so, you see what looks like massive foreign influence going on. I'm sure Aida can speak more knowledgeably to this and the campaign system in general. And just last week, we had this, unprecedented leak of tax documents showing that billionaires essentially don't pay income taxes. And then within like 2 hours, the IRS announces a criminal investigation, not into the billionaires, into the person that disclosed these documents. And the thing is, the reason they did that is probably because the billionaires didn't break any laws, because they have an army of tax attorneys to, like I said before, follow the letter of the law, not the spirit. So the most, I think, egregious stuff is always happening out in the open and is perfectly legal because in this case, the billionaires and people of their ilk have lobbied the government to structure the tax system in just that way so that they can go on and do those sorts of things. So that's what I'm amazed by again and again is what happens openly and what's allowed, completely separate from what's not allowed, which we saw a whole bunch of with the Trump administration. I think is partly why liberals were so repulsed by him is because he was just kind of you're not doing the legal forms of corruption, you're doing the illegal ones, and I would say both of them are bad, but unfortunately that's not the legal apparatus that we have.
I would just add the revolving door. You have people who worked in the Obama administration. Maybe they carried out policies that hurt regular people here and regular people abroad. After the Obama administration, they go do work in the private sector. They profit off of these like lucrative contracts, working for like the worst firms imaginable. And then they join the Biden administration and goes on.
Sometimes they're open about it. I mean, we just had a story yesterday where Lee Fong got a recording of Senator Joe Manchin just telling the donors present in this conference, where he says, He says, make sure this guy lands safely and gets a nice gig afterwards. You know, that can help us. They're just openly saying that that's the system that we have, where they're rewarded for how they vote as soon as they leave. I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. Like, they openly discuss this, and like the system is set up for that. When you cut, I mean, we always have the thing, let's cut Congress's pay and all these things. What that ends up doing is it makes it so that they become more dependent on private financiers if they're not able to, you know, I mean, I'm not saying woe is politicians. Obviously, you know, I have probably the same feelings that a lot of people do about them. But the reality is they're going to lean more on this system of legalized bribery, the less money that they, you know, have to be able to pay for things. And that's exactly what happens. They all leave to these extraordinarily, you know, plum positions afterwards, and often in firms engaged in the exact industry that they had to regulate before. So, I mean, this isn't, you know, it's not a bug, it's a feature. This is designed that way. It's not a coincidence that they all go and land in these very nice industries that they previously had been working with in government.
There's been a couple of questions about social media, and it is a good question. Also,
I don't know anything about that.
Actually, Ken, I'm not even going to go to you on this one. Out of it, but it's actually a real concern, you know, that your the record of what you do on social media is permanent, and it's part of how your public relations exist as a journalist. It's also something, a site of where people's careers are built now. You know, as an editor, I frequently look for people with ideas or takes on things on Twitter. And you can contact people that way. And that's also the way I got a lot of the work I did when I was a freelance writer. So maybe you guys could talk about, we'll start with Aida, because Ken has, you know, his reputation precedes
I have
him.
thoughts.
How has social media been a factor in your career and your work?
Oh, I think Twitter has done more for like my career than like journalism school or any other thing I've ever done. I mean, that's not true. Like, obviously I've done good stories, but I feel like it or not, a good spicy tweet will get you more attention than like a really well done article on like a boring subject that like nobody reads. But you know, you have to be careful. People get in trouble because of their social media a lot. And sometimes, you know, you don't even have to do anything wrong to get in trouble for your social media. Just recently, we saw the AP journalist who's fired. They blamed it on some social media violation. You know, a long time ago, got in trouble for tweeting about having immigrant parents. You know, those are not like objectively offensive things, but like at a lot of newsrooms, like the rules are not enforced evenly. And so sometimes, you know, if you're a woman of color, if you're a person of color, and you say something that is not like super political, it is politicized. And so that is definitely something to like keep in mind.
Yeah. You know, when I was a freelance writer, I wrote for the New York Times once, and I got a letter in the mail at my parents' house asking me to observe their social media policy. You know, I was never an employee, but you know, it's the enforcement I think is only growing, and the example of the AP journalist who was clearly fired without cause recently is a really stark example of that. So let's go to Ken over here. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
I never even tried to go into the big corporate places because I figured, you know, even if by some miracle I got a job there, I'm going to violate their things. I mean, a lot of these outlets, they make people sign like legal agreements saying that they can't say this or that on social. It's really serious. So I thought the degree of control was just not going to agree with my temperament. So I didn't even bother. I just figured, well, I'll just have to work wherever it's going to tolerate the kind of people like me that you know, say things on there. Fortunately, places like The Nation do exist, and I think understand that you know, giving people a wide berth is you know, just going to be better overall. But the vast majority of outlets don't see it that way. And as Aida said, you can't just learn the rules and memorize. I mean, there's politics at play. There's questions of power. So, for example, you can come up with any number of examples of people who have expressed personal opinions on. You guys mentioned Israel and Palestine, and I think the obvious reality is that it doesn't cut both ways. And so, if you express an opinion of sympathy towards the Palestinians, that's not going to be treated the same way as if you express opinion of sympathy to Israelis. So it's very dangerous. I wouldn't be able to survive for very long in that kind of environment. So I don't know that I have very great advice, but I would say you're right to be, if you're not working at a sort of, I mean, the nation is legacy. The nation is such a weird beast because you guys are chill, but you are a legacy institution. I guess I would just say, these kind of stuffy places that tend to be very uptight about these kinds of things. Yeah, you're right to be nervous about it.
Yeah. So this is another interesting question that kind of relates from Zoha Farid Chishti, I think. And the question is about censorship, whether you've encountered censorship and if that's something that you have to navigate. And I think that actually one thing that goes into this as well is also just obstruction, like resistance from sources who often are public servants who do have an obligation to answer our questions when people in the media ask them. But censorship and also, obstruction from sources.
I would say that when I worked at The Hill, like thehill.com, I was definitely told that the publication is owned by a Trump supporter, so he doesn't really like things that are super critical of Trump. And like there was this one instance where I wanted to write up a quick post about something creepy Trump had said to a woman, and I was told no, that's not newsworthy, or no, we're not going to do that. At The Intercept and at The Nation, obviously I do not run into those problems, but I think it can be a problem at more mainstream outlets.
There have been a couple of questions about this, about something we've been talking about throughout, and because it's such a core issue of working in the media, which is about neutrality, and people are asking if not being neutral is a risk to their careers. And I mean, I think I can talk to that as well, that it would certainly be a risk in terms of if you want to have the kind of orthodox media trajectory that, goes from journalism school to a newspaper to CNN or whatever, or The Atlantic or whatever, you want to identify. But I think there are increasingly career paths that are nothing like that. And I think the three of us all have different but unconventional paths. There is to an extent, you don't want to make enemies just for the sake of it. But I think that there is a space where if you occupy a certain niche and you have a point of view, that you can create a path. Do you guys feel that that's true to your experience?
Oh, totally. I think that you make a good point here. The thing is, when I was younger, first getting into this, I asked myself this exact question, and I figured, why do I want to? You're going to end up getting the kind of career that it's going to reflect your behavior. So it's like, why do I want to be someone else in order to get this job that is going to be for someone else? Do you know what I mean? Like, so I guess, maybe I can be very disciplined and not say things and end up somewhere, but then that ensures I'll have to do that for the rest of my life. It's not like you get in there and suddenly you're safe. You do have to do that forever. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just my temperament, but I couldn't. So I was just like, well, if I just behave the way that I normally am, then the kind of jobs that I'll find will be suited to that. Because, I mean, can you imagine just like sitting on your hands and holding your tongue your entire life? That seems really, I mean, the people that do that, they're not doing that intentionally. They just don't have any thoughts to begin with. You know what I mean? Like their mind is already very disciplined. So I think, I don't know that it's even possible to, I mean, obviously, you know, one has to have discipline and be careful and work in work generally, but I don't know that that's a tall order, you know, like 30 years of your life, just not saying things that you want to say. That seems pretty hard to me.
Aida, do you have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I've been on both ends of it where early on in my career, like, you know, my first internship was at a local news outlet, and then I did Arizona PBS where I couldn't really, you know, say the things I wanted to say, write the way I wanted to write. I worked at the Hill, where it was the same, you know, pretty standard, strict, I guess, like guidelines of what a journalist should be and act like and sound like. And then that really changed when I got to The Intercept. I had more freedom to do my own thing. And I think like I balance it like decently where it's not like I'm the most like unemployable person in the world, you know. I think just because I'm more in progressive media doesn't mean that like I'm like totally ostracized by traditional outlets or anything like that. And so I think I've like carved out a path. And I mean, the truth was like I really couldn't live like that. Like what Ken said, like just spending years of your life like not being able to you know, say what's on your mind, talk about like what you believe in. It wasn't for me. And so I think increasingly like there's more space to do that.
I think it's also a case of you're kind of squandering your potential if you
Mhm.
you know, what you believe and what you're good at. You know, if you just fake it, you're not making the contribution you could be making. So let's talk shop a little. I have a question here from Ava Erickson, which is about how do you get people to talk to you? How do you connect with someone you're interviewing and get them to give you information, even if you have kind of an adversarial relationship to them, or just or you're anonymous to them? Do you have any tips?
I always start off with like really easy, basic questions, and then I feel like people think, oh, this is going to be a nice, easy interview. But then I just make it like increasingly difficult and more awkward. So that's how I do it. I always save like the real question that I want to ask, just a few questions like after. That helps, because if you just come out with your difficult question, people might be like turned off by that. And so I think, you know, just staying easy, like basic, and getting like tougher is a pretty like good way to get people to open up.
Yeah, I echo that. Start out with easier questions and save your toughest ones for last. I think that in general, I mean, if there is an adversarial thing, my assumption is just like you're not really going to get anything. I will spend that energy more finding people that aren't going to be adversarial. That's not to say that we agree on things, but don't necessarily like. I don't bother with public affairs. I mean, I'm going to give them their chance to comment and everything, but I have zero expectation I'm going to get anything from an authorized disclosure. All of my effort goes towards finding people that are going to speak to me on an unauthorized basis. And those are going to be people that want to talk to you to begin with. And then you don't have to worry about all these kind of games and tricks and things. Because the truth is, public affairs isn't going to tell you anything that's not in their interests. You know, an official is not going to generally tell you anything. Like a public facing official that's allowed to speak to you, because they're going to be held accountable to what they say, because it's public and their bosses will yell at them and things. So, I mean, a lot of the people I speak to, I don't know that I would say a lot of them are conservative. My experience with a lot of national security, I don't know that we'd agree on things, but it just doesn't really come up. I just more focus on, okay, what constructively can we agree is a problem here, and that you would like to see change, and then they'll describe the situation to me, and then I can run it by someone else to see if that's accurate. So a lot of this stuff comes from relationships that aren't adversarial. And then when I do FOIA too, you don't want to be hectoring them and be like, come on really hard, unless you're going to sue them. That's a completely different thing. But generally, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And so that's generally been my approach, is to just try to be polite to people. But, or find people for whom, you might have a common interest in something that's going on. They care about something that you care about, or they, have reservations about some policy that you think there are problems with.
So there have been a few questions about the way that reporting on DC politics connects to international politics. One, I'm going to lump a couple of questions together here. One was about, do you feel that there's a kind of gap in reporting on foreign policy in American political journalism? And the other question is, how do you go about being an American political journalist if you have a background from another country? Or, I think all of us are probably children of immigrants. Is that right?
Yes.
So, if you kind of come from a background that isn't, the kind of white bread mainstream American, does that play into how you conduct it?
I would say it's definitely a disadvantage. A lot of media is kind of blue blood, sort of like, it's kind of waspy. I'm not saying that, people are, overtly racist or anything, but, creates a sort of in-group where they're able to relate to each other a little easier than they can with you. So yeah, it's a disadvantage for sure. I mean, the presence of, like, there's so few Latino, and there's so few in the national media. I'm like shocked by, given the percentage of the country that is demographically, it's like pretty amazing. But as to how to get around that, I don't. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it also comes through in what they think are relevant stories too. A lot of the problems with media, I think, are not necessarily people being told and ordered around what to cover, but just like it wouldn't occur to somebody of a sort of upper crust background, stuff that is of concern to the vast majority of the public. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge. I don't think it's insurmountable, but 100% that's a real thing.
To take the first half of that question, I'd say one of my biggest criticisms of the American left is kind of like the lack of international solidarity, where Americans in general are not very interested in what happens abroad. They don't really think about it. And those are like troubling trends that even like trickle into the left and the progressive movement. And so I think like going forward, one of the big challenges will be like, how can we break down those barriers and get Americans to like actually care about what the American empire is doing in other countries, and what is going on in other countries, and how it connects to the struggles here. And lately, like for example, I've been thinking a lot about sanctions, working on stories about sanctions, and that's an example of something that it's really important. It's essentially economic warfare, but it's so boring, and so like people are not going to click on it or have like a strong emotional response, because there's kind of that gap between like intellectually what it is, and then how people connect to it on how like it affects actual human beings and stuff. And so I think like the job of journalists is to kind of like lay out the stakes and use like people and stories and faces to bring to life these like very boring topics.
Yeah. We've got a few questions that are also talking shop, but it comes up, it brings up the situation that we've been dealing with the past year, which is just what actual medium you use to interact with people. And obviously that was totally derailed by having lockdown for a year. And I know that Ken, I think you never even managed to move to DC the whole time you were the nation's DC correspondent.
I was in DC, but then I got there and it was like 2 months after the pandemic started. And so I was all excited. It's like, ooh, time to meet with all these sources. Because the national security world, they'll tell you things in person. I mean, I'm sure this is true generally, but people tell you things in person that they won't tell you on the phone because they might be paranoid that, someone's recording, or the Justice Department can subpoena it, as we've seen they've done. So yeah, it was almost immediately after I got there, the pandemic started.
So what do you find, Aida, in terms of, do you think that your ability to get sources to disclose information was hampered by not being able to be in the same physical space?
Yes, definitely. Hill reporting especially is all about being face to face and being there in person. I mean, one of the greatest things about the Hill is that people can ignore your emails, people can ignore your calls, but it's a lot harder to ignore you when you're like up in their face, sticking your phone out, like recording them. And so, during the pandemic, without that, it meant that I had to rely a lot more on phone calls, emails, and Twitter. And I have found that Twitter is actually a pretty great resource for meeting sources. I think when I was younger, when I was in journalism school, I was told by my professors, call people, cold call people. And it's like, no, I find that in 2021, a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people, are more likely to respond to DMs that are out of the blue, or even DM you themselves. Whereas I think spam calls also have something to do with this, where people just don't answer the phone as much nowadays. So I think Twitter can be decent. Facebook will always be decent. LinkedIn, I think, can be underrated for finding people in a particular, I guess, agency or firm, all those things.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. I was actually kind of thinking that there's a story that I remember reading about Lyndon Johnson. It's probably in that huge book that I haven't read. So maybe this is a story, but I remember reading that when Johnson was a senator or involved in politics at a lower level, that he would spend all day in the men's room of the Capitol building, just standing at the sink washing his hands all day, because people would come in and gossip to each other, and he would overhear it, and he would know everything that was going on for him to manipulate everybody. Anyway, so this is kind of related. A question about have you found just under the current climate, or we could also talk about the previous government, how do you find different figures in government in terms of talking to reporters and being transparent? Is there a party difference, or has there been a difference from the previous administration to this one? What's been your experience with that? I think, Aida, you communicate with people on the Hill directly, as we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the biggest differences is the Trump administration was notorious for the leaks. Everyone was leaking everything all the time. And the Biden administration has really clamped down on that. People are pretty quiet. They're very careful about what they say to reporters. So because they're a lot more unified, it can be I guess more difficult to get stories that way. Congress, I think that's why Congress is so fun. I think especially the House side, there's so many of them. They're all going to talk, say crazy things. The Senate is a little bit more boring because there are fewer of them. They're a lot more careful about what they say, but the House, I think, is very fun to cover for that reason.
Yeah, I found this administration to be a lot more disciplined. So, for example, they're much quicker to respond to your emails. With the Trump administration, Homeland Security almost never responded to my query. They didn't even say, no comment or something. It was just nothing. Multiple agent, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, whatever it is. And then with this one, you're way more likely to get a prompt response, hey, I'm going to try to get back to you with this. And then they'll give you a statement, but the statement is always like, it's like I was saying before, it's going to be in their interests. And this administration is more competent, so that I think they kind of know, they don't have open contempt for the media in the way that the Trump administration did. So I think that the net effect is the same. You end up finding basically nothing, at least from the parts that I cover. But with respect to open records, like FOIA policy, this administration is better, but still not great. The thing is, there's a lot of just career officials that don't change when you have a new administration. So they kept the same FOIA guy in the FBI and DHS, all these different agencies that Trump did, and Trump kept the same career guys that Obama did. There's not a whole lot of change in that respect. At the executive level, the Democrats, both Biden and Obama, they just are better about open government than at least Trump was. And that, I think that just, I don't have, a statistical analysis or anything, but just informally, I would say, yeah, they're more responsive in producing records and things, but the difference is one of degree. It's not, there's not a dramatic change.
It sounds like the greater competence of the Biden administration almost means they're able to be less transparent.
Exactly. I got a funny story about that. I had some sources in the State Department who were telling me during the Trump administration that Trump was, pushing up the liberals, and what he was doing, since you're a federal employee, you can't just fire someone because you don't like them. So he was moving them and putting them out to pasture, longtime diplomats, putting them in the FOIA office. Well, what do you think happens when you've got an experienced diplomat who Trump has, sidelined their career, and you put them in charge of disclosing records? What happens is they give me stuff that probably you're never going to get under any other administration. So the incompetence actually helped in certain respects. Someone like the Biden administration, they're going to run a tight ship, and they're not going to release derogatory stuff insofar as they're able to prevent it. But yeah, you're exactly right in that regard.
So for you, Aida, on talking to people on the Hill, do you have a rubric of like when someone's telling you the truth or when they're dodging you? Like, has there been any patterns in how that plays out?
How so?
I guess just in terms of specifically the people you talk to, Republicans versus Democrats, or people in different positions or levels of government.
Well, I feel like when it comes to Congress, like there are just certain members who are known for being chatty. They will talk to anyone, anytime, and say too much. And then you have the people who are a lot less responsive to press. Like, an example would be Kirsten Sinema on the Senate side. She does not talk to reporters. Very rarely does she talk to reporters, and when she does, it'll be from an Arizona outlet. Like, even in the Capitol, when people try to ask her something, her staff will like keep them away and be like, "We're not accepting questions." An example of a super chatty Republican, back when he was in Congress, Mark Meadows would talk to literally anyone in the world about anything. Like, he didn't care who you were, what you were doing. You ask a question, he will answer it. And so I think just from my years there, I've kind of like categorized my people, where if I need a quick quote, or if I kind of want to get to the bottom of what's really going on, I will have people that I gravitate toward, because I know other people will just say no, like they won't let me in at all.
Ken, do you have any names on your list for people to hit up for leads?
I don't know the Hill like Aida does. I have people that I know that in any situation, it's like, ooh, he's going to be mad about this. That's so much of my compass for deciding like who's likely to be pissed off by something, and often rightly so. It's generally, I mean, I think there's this West Wing idea that you're going to kind of corner somebody with these tough questions and get them to admit something, and I've never found that to be effective. It's more like you have someone that's going to feel bad about something that's bad that's going on, and they'll tell you about it. And so that's kind of how I think of it. There are people who sort of have certain sympathies, and in the intelligence community, it's so reactionary in a lot of ways that that the best you can do is find someone, oh, they happen to be sympathetic to this one issue. Maybe they'll tell me about it. So that's sort of my approach.
Yes, it's a question of knowing your sources, right?
Right, exactly.
So actually, we're going to have to wrap up about now. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Aida and Ken for sharing your insight with us. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and in 15 minutes, there'll be a screening. So thanks very much, and we'll see you then.
Good talking to you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.